difficult as this last week has been, just imagine living in winters like this for 40 years in a wooden shanty, dirt floors, no electricity, no running water. The only heat was a pot-bellied stove that burned coal. That's a challenge. So just in your experience today and this week, remember that it can really be tough. And it was winter after winter. So I want to thank Watermark for hosting the presentation today. And before I go any further, there are two people I'd like to recognize who helped me with the book. Helped me immensely. The first is my wife, Celeste. She's in the back taking photographs. She did a lot of the research on the public records, death certificates, birth certificates, marriage certificates, divorce certificates. She researched a lot of the newspapers, the Hutchinson newspaper, the Dodge City Globe, and she was also able to identify in those newspaper articles a number of the incidents that I added to the text. The second person I want to recognize is my cousin, who is back in California, in San Diego now. And she was able to gather a number of negative photographs that her uncle, pictures that her uncle had taken. And we were able to get them processed and developed. And she graciously has allowed us access to the photographs. The book has 36 photographs in it. And we're going to show about another 20 or so in a few minutes that are not in the book. But I think that helps you get a better sense of the subjects and topics I was writing about. For those of you who have not yet read the book, I believe the photographs that we show will give you a foundation, a reference of the events that I'm describing, and a good background. And for those of you who have already read the book, if you have any questions or need any clarifications, the photographs might help. I wrote about my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and my mother to recognize the effort the effort they made to make sure their families were secure. They were strong and determined women. Each of their own stories has incredible parts to their journeys. And so I tried to cover each of them individually. Of course, some are joint experiences. And I wanted to make and to detail as much as I could the hardship that they went through, the sacrifices they made, so that their descendants would have a better opportunity when they became adults. And so another point I was trying to make in writing the book was to bring their story to light, not only in Southwest Kansas and Kansas as a whole, but to the entire country. Many of the writings about Latino women take place on the East Coast or the West Coast, maybe in southern Texas, but for the rest of the country, very little, and certainly not enough, has been written about Latino women. And I think the last objective I was trying to reach was to give each individual who reads the book a sense of they can overcome the hardships that life gives to us. There's a quote from a movie, No Country for Old Men, where the sheriff's father says, "This country is hard on people." And so I wanted to recognize that, but to also encourage people, hey, get yourself together, we'll figure this out. We've been through worse, and if we stay together, work hard, one foot after one step, follow one step, and we will get through this, and we will do better. And our kids, our descendants, will appreciate our efforts. So those were my objectives. And I think, unless you want to do an introduction, I can start with pictures.
So I read the book. My name's Anita Mendoza, and I'm with the North End Historical Society. And I want to thank Dennis for writing this book, because here in Kansas, he's right. There are not a lot of stories about the Latino women, especially coming to Kansas. And anyone who has passion about their history, about their grandparents, coming to the state should read this book, because it really describes, he did such a wonderful job describing their story. So I just really want to thank Dennis for writing this book. It is a beautiful, beautiful book. It'll be one of my favorites. So.
Thank you. Thank you. One final point before the first picture is there are many, many people in Kansas who do not know that there was a segregated community in Dodge City for half a century. It's just a story that no one talks about or recognizes. And more than once I've talked to officials and they had no idea. So with that, we'll start the photographs. And again, I'm trying to give you a frame of reference so when you read it, read the book. This is a photograph of Candelaria. She's the first part of the book. She was born in 1865, a few months before the Civil War ended. She was born in central Mexico, down in this area. And the place is called Aguascalientes.
Dennis, go ahead and you can hold the microphone while you're up. Yeah. Well.
Thank you. And this dark line with the little white circles on it, that's the railroad, Mexico's railway. And there was a revolution brewing in 1900, 1905. And so my great-grandmother Candelaria insisted to my great-grandfather, you have to put us in a safe place. And so they went to Juarez and El Paso, taking that train all the way up to El Paso. They lived there for 4, 5, 6 years. And then the Santa Fe Railroad took them to Dodge City so that my great-grandfather could work there. And that is how our family got to Kansas. You have to, a lot of people do not know that the Santa Fe, the railway, they made a conscious decision to utilize Mexican men to work the railroad. The Santa Fe sent recruiters into Mexico to look for families to come do the work. They preferred not to hire single men because they take off after a while and they want to go get married or they want to go back home and be with family. But with Mexican man who is married with a family, he's got to provide for that family and wouldn't be more likely to stay. And so that is how they ended up in Dodge City. When my grandmother and grandfather first got to Dodge City, this is what they saw. The Santa Fe Railroad had a labor camp or work camp for the Mexican workers. And over on your right, you can see some of the abandoned rail cars that were used for homes for the family. You can, in the very background, that is the Santa Fe Roundhouse, where the work was being done on railroad cars. And this implement or device right here is a water pump. The Santa Fe provided 2 water pumps for the village, one on each side. As I said earlier, there was no running water, so that's how the families were able to get water. This photograph on your upper left, that is a layout of Garden City. It's a plat of the streets in Dodge City. And towards the right corner, up there, you see the number 1. That's the Santa Fe property. And you can see that there are train tracks between number 1 and the rest of the city. In the right-hand corner is a blow-up of number 1. You can see the roundhouse there, that curve, and there are approximately 6 sets of railroad tracks between the roundhouse and Dodge City. And the Mexican work camp, it was located right in that area behind the roundhouse and between the tracks. And so the camp literally was 5-10 yards in some instances from this a set of tracks. This is the front look of the roundhouse, and behind it and towards the left was the village. They called the work camp the village later on. This was a chapel that the Mexican families asked the Catholic Church to build for them to practice their faith. And this photograph was taken probably about 1915. It was very much like the rest of the housing, no running water, no electricity, no indoor plumbing. It too was heated by a coal burning stove. Here on your left, you can see that. This is the inside of that chapel. One of the things that stood out in the research about the Mexican village was the proximity of the children and the railroad tracks. There was no dedicated playground area. The whole village, if you will, was the children's playground, and they were often right next to the tracks. A lot of families planted gardens, and again, for the kids, that was a fun place to be. This picture was taken in about 1941. The woman on the right in the light dress is my grandmother, Raphaela. The woman on the left is my mom. It was taken in about 1941, just before World War II. And my grandfather and my uncles, the older boys, were able to put enough money together to buy a house, rent first, rent to buy, a small house on Dodge City's east side. And my uncles, two of my uncles who are still living, describe it as paradise. Running water, gas heat, they had a stove. You can imagine. This is my grandmother in about 1945. This photograph here is obviously, my oldest uncle, Salvador, getting ready to go to World War II. On the left is my grandmother, to our right is Salvador's wife, Rosella. And I show this picture to make one point that the Mexican men in the village fought in World War II. They were prepared to go and give their lives for World War II. But also, most people don't realize that World War II was a transition point. World War II accelerated the movement of the Mexicans from the work camp into Dodge City proper. And my grandmother and grandfather were fortunate enough to be one of those families. This picture of my mom was taken in 1943. She's reading a Hollywood gossip magazine, which I understand are still popular today. But again, it's a symbol here of how the cultures are starting to have more items in common. And I was told in doing the research too that my grandmother had a basic reading knowledge, but when my mom and aunts would leave the gossip magazines and were off to school, she would pick them up and read them, and then she had questions she would ask when the girls got home. So this man is Candelaria's oldest son, Candelaria, my great-grandmother, who we started with. His name was Abran. He joined my grandmother from Mexico in 2019. And if you look at the fence, this picture was taken in the work camp. If you look at the fence, you see the wood is kind of uneven and a little bit worn. And what that shows you is that many of the wooden shanties that the Mexicans lived in at first were throwaway lumber. They were made from throwaway lumber. Santa Fe didn't have any use for them. They didn't want to spend the money and time to pick them up and take them to some garbage disposal or whatever. And so the Mexican men were very resourceful and built fences and sheds and houses, and that's how they were able to get along. This picture was taken in the middle of the 50s, and so you can see a whole different, it's a whole different focus. This is my grandmother. She loved her grandkids and their friends, and that looks like some birthday party. And her youngest son, Mauricio, is standing next to her. But again, it shows you happy faces. People are doing better. You can just tell from that picture. The next few pictures are just to show you slices of the Mexican and Mexican-American lives that were being led after the 1950s. And again, you're seeing common experiences between the Mexican community and the Anglo community. Music and dance is very important in the Mexican culture, and some of those pictures reflect that. This photograph was taken in the mid-50s, and it was just the demise or the end of the work camp was halfway through. The bottom of this red tip shows you a blank area of land, and on this right here is the remnants of the last few houses in the camp. Santa Fe had decided to use oil for its engines and locomotives, and so they raised a number of the homes and put in this oil tank. And you can see all of the 6 sets of tracks that the families had to negotiate when they left the camp to go into Dodge City proper. There was a street further down the road, about half a mile, but there was also a tunnel. Many of the residents would go through the tunnel and under the tracks. The tip of the blue arrow is the Arkansas River. This picture was taken in the mid-60s. It shows a float, celebratory 4th of July float that was sponsored by the American GI Forum. Again, you see this mixing now. Not only the people aren't being pushed aside, but they're now participating in civic events. The GI Forum was formed after World War II. A number of Mexican veterans decided, when they got back, they recognized that they and their families were not getting first-class citizenship, and so they organized, the veterans did, and started this organization. Wichita had a chapter, Garden City had a chapter, Dodge had a chapter, Newton. But their main focus at first was education, access to education. And later on, in the late 60s, they began to become active in civil rights. There were organizations, the GI Forum was not the only organization sponsoring beauty contests. But they were part of the culture in Dodge City. The women, there was an auxiliary division of the GI Forum, and the women, they would support fundraising events. They began to turn to civil rights. My mother and others helped people get their citizenship. They helped people file their income tax. They were willing to go before the school boards and the school principals and say, hey, this is a problem, we need to fix it. So the women were very active in that circle. And this final picture is, it's the headstone for my great-grandmother and great-grandfather. And the back side of it has this picture of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And I wanted to recognize, for the readers to recognize that this headstone represents the presence of the Mexican community and Mexican American community in Dodge City for over 100 years now. My family, as of about 10 days ago, is now in its 6th generation American born. So we've been here and we're active. And so I'm hoping that by the end of the book, where I outline what some of my family has done, that everyone can see the contribution that the Mexican communities, especially along the railway lines, gave to this country's economic position. My final comment on this photograph, it was taken in 1988 at Gage Park in Topeka. My mother, back row, third from the right, with all of my siblings. My father had passed away by then, so that's why he's not in the picture. We were celebrating my brother's graduation from law school. He's on the far left. It's not the guy, the good-looking guy in the blue shirt. I graduated over on the far left. So, but with that, I'd like to conclude. I appreciate your attention, and during the question and answer session, if we have any, we'll be glad to talk to you, or as long as the store will let us, we can visit afterward.
Candelaria, she's your
Candelaria is my great grandmother.
great.
Just one
One
Oh,
great.
wait a minute.
Great.
Yes, one great.
Great grandmother. And I love the beginning, why she came to the States. And you did such a wonderful job describing the hardship, living in the shanties, living in the village, but also how they helped each other. And I thought you did an excellent job describing her and her story.
Did you want me to read that passage?
I did. I picked a passage out of here because I was trying to get through the book. I couldn't get through it. But this page here really hit me because of what they had to endure, not just living out there, but also the discrimination that they had to deal with. So I highlighted this piece for Dennis to read.
Thank you. This passage is this excerpt is from during World War II. I'll preface the paragraph by letting you know that my mother and other women in Dodge City worked on preparing medical kits. They sewed parachutes. They put medical kits with gauze. Roosevelt and his works project, all of the things that he did for the New Deal. One of them was basically to get ready for war. And so my mother participated in there. And as you saw, my uncle went to fight in Europe as well. So during the war, of course, a lot of items are rationed. And my mother had gone to a general store, to get some bed sheets. And the passage reads, "Days later, Irene encountered another unpleasant event when she went to the linen store to buy bed sheets. After making her selection, she stood, she stood in the cashier's line behind two other women. When she reached the counter, the white clerk told Irene that she must go to the end of the line that had formed behind her. The clerk added that when she finished tending to the other customers, she would then serve Irene." So these were common, I think they were at times common slights back in those days. I think the thing that's particularly troublesome is that this is during the war. Irene's brother is getting ready to fight in the Battle of the Bulge. I don't want to do too many surprises or take away surprises, but I'll just say that the village men went to fight the war.
Another thing that I loved is that in doing my own family search and knowing my grandmothers, both my grandmothers had arranged marriages, and then I noticed in here too, there was a lot of arranged marriages within your family. And was it Irene or Raphael? Very young.
Candelaria got married, arranged married, on a hacienda or a rancho in Mexico. She was 14 when she married this older man. He was 15 years older than her. And she had her first child within a year. My grandmother, Raphaela, she was living in Dodge, and she had infatuation with a musician who turned out to be my grandfather later on. And she ran off with him for a few days, 2 or 3. The whole incident turned unpleasant, and between my grandfather's parents, my grandmother's parents, or I'm starting again, between my grandfather's parents and my the boyfriend's parents and the priest, they met together and decided the resolution for the dilemma was to have them get married. So my grandmother married at 13, and my grandfather was 23. So that ended with World War II. I know World War II was horrific, but things changed a lot after World War II.
In Dodge, I can't even imagine, I mean, it's cold outside. Dodge and Garden City, it, and like you said, living in those shanties, living in those conditions, without even running water, electricity, I can't even imagine how they endure their winters. And I wouldn't have survived it, I know. But did you have any stories from them on the conditions and how hard it was during living out there?
Yes, in the chapter that deals mainly with Raphaela, I describe how both my grandmother, my mom, and my uncles, and one aunt vividly described to me their experiences, how cold it was, how difficult things were, and how my uncles would have to go fetch water from the water pump, bring it back. Another uncle described to me that in the summertime it was so hot, they didn't have electricity for even a little simple fan. They would go over to a cousin's, another family member's house, because he had trees in his yard, and they would lay out the blankets so the kids could play in the shade and be in the shade. They would pull chairs and sit outside to endure the heat. My grandmother had a unique habit that she kept even after she left the village and had her own house. She would not do the dishes until the sun went down, because she had gotten so used to all those other years. It was too hot in the house in the summertime to do the dishes, so let's just wait till it cools down and then we'll do the dishes. And then it ended up that way, even when she had air conditioning or swamp cooler in her house.
There was another part in the book, and I wish I marked it, where they went to the encampments where after World War II, they were breaking down those encampments.
Yes.
Where Grenada, was it Grenada?
Oh, yes, okay. So World War II ends, of course, in August with the atom bomb. And again, many people don't realize this, but one of the concentration camps, kindly called relocation camps, was set in Colorado, about 80 miles away from Garden City. And when the war ended, they shut the camp down in 1946. And the federal government then decided to sell all of the plumbing and anything else that they had out there. And they advertised all over southwestern Kansas. And my father and a friend in a pickup or a truck drove to Colorado, and they, my dad got a tub, showered, pipe, the fittings for a shower, a commode, and all the pipes that you need to operate it. They got linoleum for their kitchen walls. We had, my mom got the 2 porcelain sinks that lasted forever. And so we were able to modernize by buying the salvage from that in relocation camp. I spoke to the man who's the director of it now, and he said there were a lot of things left, and the government just bulldozed them into the ground. I suspect if you went out there, you probably could find some buried stuff. But that is how we got running water for the kitchen and the restaurant. Was by getting the salvage from the Japanese concentration or relocation camp.
Because not a lot of people even know that.
Colorado
Yeah.
housed it, yes. That's
Yeah.
right.
I was, because that surprised me. I mean, I've heard of them. I knew they had them in California. I didn't realize they had them in Colorado too.
Yeah.
So that was, I loved reading that. And that's how resourceful your family was to go out there so they can upgrade their home. So I love this book. I really do love the book. Because it describes so much, not just about your family, but then you also detail what's going on in the world that affects them.
I think that's one of the things I want to point out quickly is that I do write about the interaction of family, and we all know that families have ups and they have downs, and they have good times and they have bad times. So I try to, as much as possible, make it clear to the reader that this is what was happening. And so the other thing I wanted to show are the actions that a government takes and the impact on the people of those actions. So I wanted to try to focus on those 2 things.
The other thing, in the beginning, and it really bothered me because I did not know this, is early on, they were trying to halt the immigration of them coming through, and they set up, they were like showers.
Yes, I forgot the word already that they used to describe it, but some of the immigrants from Mexico, especially when they went through El Paso, they gave them a bath, if you will, but it sprayed with, it was a chemical spraying, a chemical bath to delouse them, to take the disease they're bringing in, so on and so forth. And so that went on for more than a decade, starting in 1917. And and they actually, the Santa Fe had a train. I'm telling you all the good stuff from the book.
There's a lot more though, there's a lot.
The Santa Fe had a train that went along this railway, and they would go through the Mexican neighborhoods, the shanties, the work camps, and not only spray the people, but they'd go inside and spray the house. And when they went through Dodge, it was February and cold. Gee, that sounds familiar. But those families had to go through all that. And they would make them take off all their clothes, spray them down, and you can pick up your clothes at the end of the train cars. So, if the younger Mexican-American kids in the community in general, a lot of them know about their families that, there was a revolution, and then my grandpa and grandpa, they came over and they went to work for the railroad. And that's it. They don't realize all of the detail, challenges, and issues, and epidemics that they went through. The Dodge City work camp they went through in 1918 flu. People were dying during that pandemic. Even after the pandemic was over, tuberculosis was running wild at times in the village. They went through the Great Depression, they went through the Dust Bowl. I'm certain that many families who are here tonight, your grandparents or great-grandparents told you about Palm Sunday, the dust storm on Palm Sunday in 1935. It was so dark, so heavy. Many people thought this is Judgment Day, this is the end of the world. They put their hand in front of their face and couldn't see it. And so all of that fine dirt flowing through the boards of the shanties, and people were lost because of poor conditions.
Well,
Anyone else?
yeah, we don't want to give it all away.
Dennis, I love the book. I'm not through all of it, but through about halfway. It's very brilliantly written, as always.
Thank you.
And I love how you've intertwined history along with the families, their struggles, all of these things. It's very poignant and powerfully written. I can't even imagine the number of hours that you spent researching all of these details. But what was the most surprising thing that you learned along the way when you were doing all the research or talking with all the people? What was the thing that surprised you the most?
Well, there were 3 or 4 events that I had no idea. But probably the one event that surprised me, and none of my family, my mother's side, knew anything about it. But when Candelaria first entered the United States in about 1903, she was living in El Paso for those 6 or 7 years. She had a son named Fernando, but there was an epidemic going through El Paso, and he died during the course of that epidemic at about age 1.5. And I had never heard this, and I've asked a lot of relatives, did you know? Nope. But Celeste, in doing the research on the death certificates and birth certificates, we found one with the name Fernando Padilla, and we talked about it, and I'd never heard of it. Then we saw on the record that the parents were Candelaria Padilla and Ascension, my grandfather's name, Padilla. And when I told my aunts and uncles, they were like, well, Mom never said anything like that. I said, well, here it is, here's the record. So I think that's one of them. There were many others, but nobody knew we had an uncle named Fernando. Yes.
You mentioned that the segregation the area was segregated for 50 years. What time period are you referring to?
The Mexican work camp began to get populated in 1910. World War II, there was, movement by individual families out of the work camp into Dodge City's east side. The Santa Fe, in 1955, they ran one of those trucks with a speaker on it. You don't have to get out, you have to get out, we're not going to let you stay here anymore. And so I would say that by 1955, the desegregation was complete. Now, most of the Mexicans did move to the east side of Dodge City, but it wasn't segregated. Yes.
Is Dodge City still east side, west side?
The east side has gotten bigger, the west side has gotten smaller. The Hispanic populations in both Garden City and Dodge City have increased. Some of Dodge is experiencing a mini white flight. Some have moved to Cimarron, and that Cimarron's population has increased. And some of them have just moved to the edge of town. But I think there's more Hispanics there now than even 30, 40 years ago.
And did Candelaria speak English?
Just enough to ask for the basics. From what I understand, she took her husband or others who could speak broken English when she went to go buy goods on the other side. Now remember now that Candelaria had a son named Manuel, and he accompanied her. He moved to Dodge as well, and he would go to the little school that they had there, and Manuel and his wife learned more and more English. So those two would always accompany her whenever she wanted to shop or do anything like that.
So Raphael spoke good English?
I wouldn't say good, but certainly enough to get around, and if she was by herself, she'd be able to say the words. By the mid 1960s, actually 1950s, her English was much, much better. She loved I Love Lucy show. She loved Carol Burnett. She thought they were hilarious. And so she was picking it up, and she was reading it in those magazines and newspapers. And of all the odd, well, I wouldn't say all, but one of the odd things about Grandma was she loved Gunsmoke. No. Oh boy. Okay. Do we have more time for more questions?
Probably just one more question is what we have time for, so I think this lady
Oh,
here in a second. I don't know if you can see her on the photo.
Hey, you spoke about, was it Fernando, who was the
Yes.
child that was left in the prison? And that no one had ever heard of that. Did you have a hard time sometimes getting people to tell you the stories that they maybe didn't want to reveal?
I think by and large, most of the people who I interviewed and talked about, they were okay. They, obviously a little nervous. You put yourself out there, but I think most of them were okay with it.
One more quick question.
Did you get to spend time with Raphael?
Yes, I did. When I was, from the time I was about 5 to about 10 or 11, I would spend a month or 3 or 4 weeks in Dodge with Grandma at my grandma's house. And I, of course, had lots of cousins to play with, keep us busy. She was a wonderful woman. So.
Well, let's give Anita and Dennis a big round of applause.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
So we are going to do signings. So if you do have a book you want signed, we'll just have you make a line here along the side, and Dennis will sign here at the table.